Welcome back to the Steele Report. As KWWL political analyst Dr. Chris Larimer of UNI joins us now to talk politics and the 1st District congressional race in particular between first-term incumbent Democrat Abby Finkenauer and her Republican challenger, State Representative Ashley Hinson. Hinson found herself on the defensive mode recently over allegations of plagiarism. So how badly was the Hinson campaign hurt, do you think, by this plagiarism allegation that came out in the New York Times?
I think it's hard to know at this point because, when I think about these races, there's a real question about the extent to which events like the one with Ashley Hinson with the plagiarism charge really matter, because research will tell us, that people, their partisan identities are so entrenched at this point, more so than they have been for a very long period of time. And it's hard to know the extent to which voters are still persuadable. There's a lot of research that would suggest that they're not, that there's a very small slice of the electorate that really makes up their mind on election day and is capable of being persuaded one way or the other based on a single story or a single snippet that comes out about an individual candidate.
So what you're saying is most of the people already know who they're going to vote for, do you think, at this point in the 1st District?
Well, the 1st District is interesting to me because it's a naturally competitive district. It's a district where, yes, Democrats outnumber Republicans, but it also has the highest proportion of no-party voters. And what we don't know is the extent to which those no-party voters lean one way or the other. Now, chances are that 90% of them lean one way or the other, and if you lean one way or the other, then you're probably going to vote like that partisan. And so I don't know if it's necessarily that people have made up their mind or are, well, I think they've probably made up their mind. I don't know how much they're actually thinking about it yet, because the hard part about these congressional races is that every presidential election cycle they get kind of consumed by what's going on nationally. And I think that's also happening with this race.
I noticed they got into a little bit of a Twitter war after my interview with Ashley Hinson, which actually was a live interview during our newscast. Did you see that on Twitter, and what did you think of that?
I did not see it. I heard about the back and forth, and again, I think for voters who are following that on Twitter, who are watching what's going on Twitter, they've probably made up their minds. They're probably leaning one way or the other and following the candidate that they like. And so they're not going to be persuaded by what happens there. So again, there's a real question about how much of this matters for those candidates. Now, it's going to matter for a small portion of the electorate, but it's hard to know. But what's interesting about the 1st District is it doesn't take much to swing it one way or the other, right? Because the last several election cycles, it's been among the top 10 most competitive races in the country for U.S. House races. So these small things may matter when it comes to this race.
You mentioned little events can make such a difference. We saw with Rod Blum just that hint of being unethical really was very damaging. Bruce Braley, at the time when he was criticizing Senator Grassley with the liquor bottles in the back, those little things matter, don't they?
They can matter, but the hard part from a research perspective is separating those little events out from sort of swings in national public opinion, because in 2014, we saw that there was a swing to the right, that Republicans nationally did well. In 2018, Democrats nationally did well. But there were also little events within each, or not little, but significant events within each one of those campaigns in 2014 and 2018 that may have also affected how voters voted when they went to the polls. It's going to be hard for both Congresswoman Finkenauer and Ashley Hinson to separate themselves from Joe Biden and Donald Trump. How do you separate yourself from the conversation that's going on nationally, because that's getting all the attention?
If you were a predicting type of person, what's coming up next in this campaign?
I don't know if I could predict what's coming up next. I think as far as numbers to watch, in my opinion, would be the youth voter turnout. Because in 2018, if you look at the Secretary of State, the Iowa Secretary of State's numbers on this, youth voter turnout in 2018 went up considerably compared to what it was in the last midterm election in 2014. So if youth voter turnout goes up again by a similar rate in 2020, you would expect that would be to the advantage of Congresswoman Finkenauer. So I think what I'm watching for is not just overall turnout numbers, but also that youth voter turnout number for the 18 to 24-year-olds. If that's up, I think that's to the advantage of Congresswoman Finkenauer.
And again, we've seen a lot of outside money come into this race already, and that, to a lot of people, is troubling. What do you make of that, all that outside money that has nothing to do with Iowa except trying to make sure that one of those candidates wins?
Yeah, I think it's difficult because obviously you need money to win, and these races are becoming more and more competitive. You're seeing, as you said, outside groups coming in, but also money is one of those things that most voters despise about politics. The perception that it's big money that runs everything, and so I think it's a turnoff for a lot of people. I don't know that necessarily is going to persuade a voter to go one way or the other, because you need that money to be competitive. You need it for organizing. You need it for get out the vote efforts.
How do you shake this out as it stands right now?
I think it's still extremely competitive. Like you said, it was very unique or unusual that you would see an incumbent member of Congress lose his or her reelection bid. And that's one of the things that Congresswoman Finkenauer has working in her favor, is that even though the approval rating of Congress is in the teens and has been for a number of years, individual members of Congress are reelected at a rate of about 90%. So as an incumbent, Congresswoman Finkenauer has that advantage. But again, this district seems to kind of ebb and flow with national tides in public opinion, where you have Bruce Braley and then Rod Blum and then Congresswoman Finkenauer, and that's kind of been the up and down with what we've seen nationally in blue wave, red wave, blue wave kind of thing. And so I think for Democrats right now, what I'm reading is that they're trying to figure out, was 2018 kind of the start of a blue wave, or sort of a precursor to a blue wave in 2020, similar to what we saw in 2006, where there was a big blue wave in 2006, and that was kind of a precursor to the 2008 presidential election. Yeah, again, I think that you would give a slight edge to Congresswoman Finkenauer as the incumbent, also in the sense that she won by about 5 points in 2018, and you're going to see you're going to see turnout be higher in 2020 than you would in 2018. On the other hand, this is still a district that went for Trump in 2016 by about 3.5 percentage points. In my mind, or in my opinion, it exemplifies the rural-urban divide that we see across Iowa, because you have 20 counties, 17 of which are very urban, outside of Black Hawk, Dubuque, and Lynn, and those are the counties that Congresswoman Finkenauer is going to do well in. And the challenge for her is to offset any losses in those other more rural parts of the district.
We'll come back and talk more politics with Chris Larimer in just a minute. We'll talk about the U.S. Senate race right here in Iowa when we come right back. And welcome back to this week's edition of the Steele Report. We're talking politics right now with University of Northern Iowa political science professor Dr. Chris Larimer. He's our KWWL political analyst. Let's talk about the Senate race right now. Can you really sort out where the money's coming from, and is it right or wrong?
I think it's hard to sort out the money as far as where it's coming from. I think about it in terms of, does it matter to voters? And again, I think they're probably frustrated by the amount of money that it takes to run for office, the amount of money that these candidates are raising. That we're at $26 million for that U.S. Senate race right now, and it's probably going to be a $30 million race. Wow. But again, I think most voters also accept the fact that they have to do that. It's a turnoff on both sides, I think. So I don't know if it gives an advantage one way or the other in terms of public opinion about the individual candidate.
Again, that's a Senate race that's probably in the top 3 or 4 in the country.
Yeah.
All eyes are on Iowa for that, for sure.
It is, and it wasn't necessarily that way just 12, 15 months ago. It was a race that initially was seen as kind of likely Republican, that Joni Ernst would likely win the race, but as the perceptions of the country have changed about the Trump administration, the perceptions of the competitiveness of this race have changed. And so I think this is a race that really is getting caught up by national politics and voters associating Senator Ernst with President Trump. And as his approval ratings go down, we've seen the competitiveness of this race go up.
Is it my imagination, or is she starting to distance herself a little bit from the president, do you think?
No, I think she's trying to, and I think that's the one, if you're looking at something to watch for this race, that's the one thing to watch, is to what extent does Senator Ernst try to separate herself or distance herself from the president, or take positions that are opposite of the president. We've already seen it on, I should say, the renaming of Army bases around the country. We've seen some separation there. We've seen it on ethanol requirements. And so I think if the president's approval ratings continue to go down, I think you're going to see Senator Ernst take more and more of those positions and do it very publicly.
Does that make it more difficult for her, though, if the president, say, would not carry Iowa again? Or is she strong enough, do you think, to take on a competitor like Teresa Greenfield, who's a first-time candidate for U.S. Senate?
That's a good question. I mean, you know, every election cycle you can go back through the election returns and see evidence of people voting one way for president, voting another way for Senate, or Senate and governor, you know, ticket splitting, so to speak. You know, I think her approval rating is slightly above the president from what I've seen in some opinion polls. So I think there's the potential there. I think it's going to be difficult because, as you said, it's her first re-election bid. It's a different electorate than it was in 2014. And most of the data right now suggests that Democrats have an advantage going into 2020, that it might be a more of a blue wave or a continuation of the blue wave that started in 2018. For the U.S. House seat between Congresswoman Finkenauer and Ashley Hinson, it's the extent to which they're able to create their own kind of conversation separate from, I mean, because they're going up against Ernst and Greenfield and, you know, Trump and Biden, and they're still trying to carve out what that race is going to be about. So that one's harder to get a real good handle on because, as I said, the district, in terms of party registration, the rural-urban divide is just one of those naturally competitive races. So that one's harder to get a read on. So the only thing that I'm looking for is that I can really see is that youth voter turnout. I really want to see the 18 to 24-year-olds, what that looks like in November.
In the Senate race, what are you looking for next as far as what Ernst does, particularly with the president? Yeah.
Oh, I guess I'm looking to see, does she continue to take positions that are opposite of the president? And how publicly does she do it? Does she come out and have press conferences where she says, you know, I disagree with the president on this particular issue or this particular statement? Or is it more that she's making these statements but not as public? Again, I would expect her, if the president's approval rating continues to decline, that she's going to be more public about policy disagreements with the president. I guess the other thing just to think about is the style of campaigning, right? So you have two extremely competitive races, and they can't campaign as they normally would.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
And so we know that the personal contacts tend to be the most effective in terms of getting people out to vote. But now you're taking that out of the equation with the COVID-19 pandemic, right? The candidates can't be out there, they can't be shaking hands, they can't be doing the pictures. The things that are most effective in terms of making a connection with potentially persuadable voters. So, I think what's going to be interesting going forward is how do the campaigns try to create that personal connection without actually being in front of voters?
You can't just get face-to-face with voters like you could on a normal election time, yeah.
You can't, and yet they're still raising record amounts of money. It's still going to be a $30 million race without being in front of voters, without having the rallies, and the same thing for that U.S. House seat.
As always, thanks to Dr. Chris Larimer, KWWL political analyst, for his great political insight, and also thanks to UNI President Dr. Mark Nook. That's it for this week's Steele Report. We'll be back here next week. We'll see you then.